Hello there, I'm Jen Ferguson with Artistic Painting Studio, and today we are going to talk about foils and the many different personalities that they actually have. And I feel that this is kind of like the best way to describe the foils and how they work, and how sometimes some work better than others, and sometimes one worked really good on Monday, but it doesn't want to work on Friday. We're just going to talk foils, and hopefully I'll be able to answer many questions about maybe why something didn't go right. We want you guys to be super successful with all your projects, and so that is why we continue to educate on every possible thing that we can talk about with the foil, so that you are successful, that your projects are fabulous, and that you want to continue to create with them. So just a little bit to start with, we deal with a lot of different manufacturers, not just one. And even though we do have multiple different manufacturers, their processes are all going to be slightly different. But even within the same manufacturer, how they process a pattern foil might be slightly different than how they process a solid color foil. And it all has to do with how the metallization is fused to the carrier. So we try really hard to make sure that we're only dealing with what we call easy release foils. But even in that realm of easy release, we sometimes have temperamental foils. Basic process though is these patterns or colors are fused to a plastic carrier. That plastic carrier sometimes is frosted, sometimes it's completely clear, but they're fused to the back side. So the side that you really don't see the pattern as well, that is the side that the metallization is on, and the side that we want to transfer from. That is what we call the transfer side. So with that process, we try to make sure that when we're preparing our surface, that our surface has really good adhesion. So if we're using a paint, a primer, whatever our base coat happens to be, that it's going to adhere to the substrate to begin with. So if you're working on wood, normally you can get away with just acrylics. If you're working on metal, glass, plastic, or anything that's non-porous, you're going to want to make sure that you're using a primer and most likely preparing that surface as well. So you want to make sure that your paint is adhering to the surface that you're working on better than the foil is adhered or fused, as we refer to it, to the plastic carrier. There's a couple ways to kind of get an idea how well your foil is going to transfer or not. One of them is to just actually use a piece of tape. I prefer Scotch tape, but we have blue tape handy right now. So you will take the back side, which we call the transfer side of the foil, take your piece of tape on an outside edge normally, so you're not going to be wasting a lot of product here, and just stick it to the back and then release the tape. If the foil is pulling off of the tape, that normally means that we have a good release. The cleaner it pulls with the tape, and Scotch tape is truly the best versus blue tape, the cleaner it pulls from the carrier, normally the easier the release is going to be. So that is one little test that you can always do ahead of time, just to kind of get an idea. If you're working on glass, you're working on plastic, these surfaces are a little challenging to begin with because there's just a harder surface to work on. So making sure I've got a super easy foil to work with, a super easy release foil, is going to be important instead of working with something that could possibly be a little temperamental, and we don't want a temperamental personality foil. And I talk about foils having personalities because I feel it's kind of like the best way to describe them. Each foil is truly individual. You know, their color, their pattern, the design, the way they're manufactured, so they are truly unique and individual. So it's kind of like, you know, a fingerprint or a thumbprint. Each one of these is its own foil, okay? And how it's going to react and how it's going to transfer is not always going to be the same from one foil to the other. So things that you can do if you come across a foil that has a personality that just tends to be a little stinker and doesn't want to transfer as well, several things that you can do. You can always take, I want to say, oh, not always. You can take the majority of our foils, okay, and give them a good crinkle. There is a couple of foils I wouldn't suggest doing this with, but that is like our weathered copper, where our weathered copper is such an easy release. You can almost blow on it, okay? Blow on the carrier and it almost releases. So you would never want to crinkle up this particular foil because it releases super easy. Crinkling is something you're gonna do if you discover that, oh my gosh, this foil doesn't want to transfer as well as the one I just used. Crinkle it first. You can always open it back up and even lay it down and just kind of smooth it back out. Extra crinkles are not going to take away from the release most of the time, but can actually help the foil release a little bit easier. The other thing is that when you are transferring, we mainly like to use a scrub brush. These are plastic bristled scrub brushes, and I like to get them where they're stiff. So they've got some pretty good resistance to the bristles. They're not super soft and flexible. You want that. Other thing that you can use is something that is either a plastic or wood scraper, and you can also scrape the foils. When you are trying to release them, if you find one that's not releasing as easy as you want it, you can transfer between the different tools, like using a scraper or the wonderful scrubber brush. And if you're still not getting the best transfer, using a blow dryer, you guys, heating up the foil as you're transferring it. I just want to show the transfer. We always have what we call a sticky board going around here. And all the sticky board is just it's called styrene. They're styrene boards, they're plastic, but it is just a surface where we put down a primer, because like I said, most of the time we like to work on a primer, and we do have to use a primer because it's plastic. And the styrene boards are a plastic material, so our Bondego sticks to this super well. And we just put a coat of foil adhesive on here. You can see it's nice and shiny because it dries super shiny. And definitely let it dry, okay? The longer you let your foil adhesive dry, the better you're going to be with your release to begin with. But besides doing your little tape test, you guys, you can always just do a little test ahead of time and see even which way you're gonna get the best possible transfer. I'm just going to pull off a little corner of this one foil, which happens to be our Wild Leopard Spots small gold pattern. And I can scrub it with my plastic scraper and see what kind of release I'm getting. And I'm actually getting a pretty good release, but there are some spots that look like they didn't get down into the texture. So I would also want to test with either a toothbrush or just go ahead and get my little scrub brush out here, because the one thing about the scrub brush, it's going to get down into all that texture, which is going to be super important to get a really good clean release. And I have to say that the scrub brush is the winner there. It scrubbed into all the texture and gave us a super good release. If we test a foil that just doesn't seem to be wanting to release really well, that we tested it first and it didn't release really well, sometimes I'll just even push with my finger just to see what I'm getting. Oh, that one's releasing super easy. Then I can follow up with maybe the scraper or the brush, but most of it all released off of the carrier, which means we've got a really easy release. The other thing is not all the foils are gonna look great on a dark black surface, this being one of them. Our Clarabelle is gonna look better on a light surface, but this will show any imperfections really, really well. So I'm just gonna go ahead and transfer a little piece here, because Clarabelle has a pretty good release, but can be temperamental at times. So I'm gonna try scraping and seeing what we got. And we've got areas that it just didn't get into, okay? We can see the black coming through really well in a few spots. So I would go back with my scrub brush, and that way I can get into those lower spots and get a good clean release. And if by chance that wasn't working, remember, you can blow dry, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and do one here with the blow dryer. I'm gonna do another little section. I'm just gonna smooth that out and just show you how we use the blow dryer if we need it to. So I turn on the blow dryer while I'm scrubbing. It's gonna heat up the foil, because one thing is foils love to be warm. So if it's really cold where you're working and you're not getting a great release, definitely heat up that room, heat up your foils. That will also help. And if you find when you release the first time, if there's little bits and pieces that haven't released as well, remember, just lay the carrier back down, scrub again, and then release. And you will get your best releases. But remember, you guys, our foils all have their own personality, their own uniqueness. We try to make sure that we are always giving you the best, super easy release foils, but sometimes you gotta work with them. You gotta help them release and just try sometimes a little harder, or some of our tips and tricks. So I hope all this helps you guys, and thank you so much for playing and creating with our wonderful foils. We love seeing all your projects.